Hey, this is Tim Peck here on Project Next, the place where we are making the next Indiana free of fear and hate, and people are scared right now about gerrymandering. A lot of people heard this word for the first time, or really paid attention to this word for the first time. It's been something you may have learned in, high school and social studies somewhere, but it's becoming real right here in Indiana as the GOP state house is actively talking about gerrymandering our state. I'm here with my co-host and co-founder Sarah Blessing. Sarah, how's your day?
It's great. It's my twin's seventh birthday today, my babies. Thank you so much, Ross. So Ross is a lawyer from Columbus, Indiana, and we have got some law-related questions for him because we have this surprise Indiana gerrymandering attempt by the president and vice president, and maybe our governor's in on it. We're waiting to hear, and we are scared and confused and having trouble sleeping over here. So Ross, thank you so much for being here,
Oh,
being
great to
our
be here. Great to
our
be here,
Indiana
Sarah.
lawyer fighting for democracy. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself? I met you through Indiana Rural Summit. When I was campaigning for State House, you were also running for State House, and I've also called you on the phone before and talked with you, and that's when I really found out you're freaking awesome. We talked for like 45 minutes or like an hour one day over the summer, and that's when I'm like, oh, I really like Ross. So tell us a little bit about you.
Well, I am the county chairman of the Bartholomew County Democratic Party, and that's my main role in politics these days. I'm an attorney. I've been practicing for 30 years. This is my 30th year of practice in Indiana. I have offices in Indianapolis. I live in Columbus. I practice all over the state. I'm a criminal defense attorney
Oh, wow.
by trade, but in my role as county chairman, I've more than dabbled in election law in the last decade, so I probably know just enough to be dangerous in that regard. I grew up in Jennings County on a farm in Jennings County. I got a political economy degree from Tulane University back in the 90s, came back to Indiana, went to law school at Indiana, what was then called IU Indianapolis, now called the McKinney School of Law, and been practicing criminal defense ever since then. So, yeah, really glad to be here.
Maybe
Yeah,
you
it's
should be on our show another time just to hear about your job, criminal defense lawyer. I mean, I bet you know some stuff that we could learn from. Okay, Tim.
well, no, I was just saying I've spoken to so many lawyers in the last week, more lawyers than I've ever wanted to, Ross. I'm sorry, because of this gerrymandering issue. But I didn't realize how deep this fight, this divide between people who went to IU Indy and IU Bloomington is. Do you not? I mean, it's all one state, isn't it? Is it all one school? What what is?
Well, it's not really. It's two schools. I mean, it's all under the umbrella of IU. I guess so. I was, I guess, working too much to pay much attention to that when I was in school. Um, but yeah, look, there's a little bit of. I think Bloomington maybe looks down their nose a little bit at Indianapolis, as they will. But I would tell you that I think people leave Indianapolis, the IU Law School in Indianapolis, ready to go to work and practice law, not talk about it. So,
Oh, I
That's
got
the
a I got a hot
second
take on that too, Ross. I went to Bloomington my first year and then finished up at IU Southeast down by where I live, which was a lot cheaper for me, and I was able to get a car. But the education program at IUS I liked a lot better because I could go and teach at multiple schools, including inner city schools in Louisville. Whereas at Bloomington, it was just the Bloomington schools. There were so few that you teach at. So I got better, intro into different types of schools and different types of kids than if I would have stayed at Bloomington. And then I saved a bunch of money, even though Bloomington was beautiful and I loved it too. Just saying.
So,
well,
Ross, you have
go
to
ahead.
learn about a whole bunch of stuff in law, and it feels like this gerrymandering issue kind of crosses a few things. There's kind of federal constitutional law going on, there's state constitutional law, election voter protections. yeah, how can one possibly know everything that they need to know to understand this issue?
Well, look, part of the problem is, and gerrymandering is nothing new. I mean, gerrymandering's been around as long as there have been maps. You know, the original the term, and people may know this or not. The term gerrymandering was a made up term by a newspaper man in Massachusetts when Elbridge Gerry drew his map to look like what they called thought it looked like a salamander. So they called it a gerrymander. They called his district a gerrymander, and for some reason the term stuck. J- Eldridge Jerry Salamander. So it's not a legal term by any means. It's not something created. It's a political term, you know, a yellow journalism term, if you will.
I
Um,
do feel like a lot more people know what gerrymandering is now than a month ago.
That's for
well,
sure.
people
Yes.
have heard the term a lot more, although a lot of people have been talking about gerrymandering and the problems with it for a long time. But uh, one thing about that I think can't be ignored when we start talking about all of these issues about voting rights and about voting is that there has been an attack on voting, uh, particularly at the United States Supreme Court level, for quite a while. And Chief Justice Roberts, you know, we we obviously all of those guys have a lot to answer for at the Supreme Court. But in terms of voting rights, it's really been the Chief Justice who's been the main driver of piece by piece by piece going after the Voting Rights Act in particular, but also refusing to step in gerrymandering cases, refusing to step in voter suppression cases that have
So
sort of
let's start
opened
with
the
that.
door to all this.
Let's start with that, Ross. Like, just bring us back to the Voting Rights Act. Like, what we hear a lot about that. What is it? Why is it so foundational? What was the world like before the Voters' Right Act?
Well,
Like,
so
yeah.
um, look, after after the Civil War, when the 14th Amendment was ratified, and we had Reconstruction in the South, many of the many of the rural areas in the South had a vast majority of African Americans, and so they elected. As you would, the majority of people, when you have a free and fair election, elected African American representatives at their state level and at the national level for a very brief period of time. And obviously, then there is a backlash against we can't have this, you know, particularly in the deep South.
Uh-oh, we lost Ross.
We can have uh, black people in the legislature. My God. So um, there was a that's when sort of systematically, you know, the Reconstruction era ended. Jim Crow came in. We got poll taxes. We got poll tests. We got voter suppression. We got murder. All the things that suppressed not only the black vote, but really the ability to even register to vote in many parts of the Deep South. Not that there wasn't voter suppression everywhere during that period of time, but particularly in the Deep South, it was systematic, it was legal, it was Jim Crow. So in the 1960s, President Johnson brought us the Voting Rights Act, and actually, I think if you could see the wall behind me, there's a picture of John Lewis on my wall. You know, who nearly got killed, beaten, almost beaten to death, trying to push voting rights. So The Voting Rights Act basically stepped into, and the federal government came in, and again, particularly in the Deep South, where we had this systematic voter suppression, and said, you know, you guys have had the opportunity to handle your own elections, and you've failed miserably. So the Justice Department was tasked, and in places where you had a history of horrible behavior about voting, it said, look, the federal government is going to approve your maps. The federal government is going to, you had your chance and you failed. So we're going to come in and say you can't systematically keep African Americans from voting. You cannot gerrymander in a way that keeps black people from voting. Um, and over the years, obviously Republicans have fought long and hard. And look, people can talk about partisanship, but on this particular issue, at least in modern times, um, party that has been pushing to overturn the Voting Rights Act. So systematically, piece by piece, lawsuit by lawsuit, um, as the Supreme Court has gotten more conservative, they have gone step by step and said, this part of the Voting Rights Act, look, this is overreach by the federal government. We states' rights, the states should be able to do these things. There's no discrimination anymore. That's a relic of the past. And my God, leave Mississippi alone. Haven't they suffered enough? So,
if there's no discrimination, how come we haven't had a woman president yet?
yeah, well, look, it's all nonsense. It's not historically based. It's not legally based. But starting with what was the Shelby case about a decade ago was the first bite out of the Voting Rights Act, and it has gone step by step by step. And the fewer protections that we have federally, that leaves a vacuum where the states can come back in and do the things that they have done. So we've seen more widespread gerrymandering. Now, it is still the part of the Voting Rights Act that you says you cannot discriminate racially is still the law of the land. However, that even that is under attack currently before the United States Supreme Court in a case out of Louisiana. In Louisiana, their argument before this very receptive Supreme Court is that yes, we've gerrymandered the African American community, but they're all Democrats, you see. So we're really not racially gerrymandering anymore. It's political gerrymandering because it's a coincidence that all of these African Americans are also Democrats, but this has nothing to do with race. It has to do with politics, and which is ridiculous. But that's their argument, and it has found a home with Chief Justice Roberts, who has said the Constitution does not protect you against political gerrymandering. They have said if it is a political, if you're doing it for political reasons, too
So,
bad.
Ross, let me stop you there. So, just to hear this fascinating story arc that you just gave us, all the way from the Civil War, bringing us through this, putting the foundations of how we even got to today. And it sounds like, racial gerrymandering, pretty clear to most that racial gerrymandering, and as I understand it, I've gone through this, a lot of cases almost in the last decade or two, really solidifying that racial gerrymandering can't happen. And that seems a little bit, I mean, it's been not put to bed, but most people, including those on the right, are going to say, yes, we understand that the Constitution protects that. And so looking for ways around it by doing political gerrymandering and saying political gerrymandering is okay. Constitution doesn't protect that. So, but can we change the Constitution? Can we clarify the law
Could we
through
make it?
Congress?
Yeah, could we say political gerrymandering is not allowed anymore, and then
So
make a fair system of redrawing our lines?
if we go back to the halcyon days of 2021, when President Joe Biden took office, and Democrats marginally controlled the United States Senate, there absolutely was the John Lewis Voting Rights Act, which did a whole bunch of things to try to overturn and correct what was happening at the legal level with the Supreme Court, which would have outlawed political gerrymandering nationwide. Unfortunately, I think we remember the senator from West Virginia and the senator from Arizona chose not to go along with that, and that didn't happen. So the answer to your question is absolutely. Look, if the Supreme Court has said this is a political question, should be resolved politically, well, the way to do it is to pass a federal law. Federal law always trumps state law when it affects a federal question. So the
So
federal
two
government,
people stopped it. So two people
yeah,
stopped it,
well, a
and
whole bunch of Republicans
all the Republicans could have voted for it too.
and
If we had two Republicans
and the
flip,
folks who would not go along. I mean, it gets complicated in talking
this is
about
where we need.
overcoming a filibuster and those kind of things. But the bottom line was, yes, absolutely, people recognize the problem. Democrats tried to solve the problem. They could, we could solve it tomorrow if people of who were fair and honest were in charge. We could stop gerrymandering tomorrow.
I just want to point out one problem here that Tim and I, this is why we founded Project Next. If we would have had people that were on both sides in Congress that were willing to talk to other people and explain to them that democracy, that American freedom is on the line, and then they just would have worked so hard to pull two people from the Republican side to get them to do the right thing and to view them as heroes and to pump them up and to praise them and to kind of put a blanket of support around them, we would not be in the place we are today. Part of the problem is we refuse to talk to people on the other side. We just assume they're monsters, right? The Republicans think the Dems are monsters. The Dems think the Republicans are monsters. So we're preventing human beings from talking to human beings. And that works. When you talk to someone for a very long time and develop a friendship and explain, you can sometimes get them to see the truth. And so hearing this now, I'm just upset because I wish I would have been in there. I would have tried. And it would have been fine if I failed. At least I would have tried. I just want to know, were people trying what was happening back there? I don't know.
Well, I think a lot of people were trying, at least on the Democratic side. I mean, look, and there were Democrats who would personally not benefit from more fair maps, but they were willing to vote for it. You know, one of the things that we see in this current climate about Texas and California and ultimately Indiana, which we'll talk about, is you know, it is Democratic states with Democrats in control that chose, I would say wrongly. A lot of people would say rightly, they did the right thing. A lot of Democratic states chose to unilaterally disarm, if you will, and do the right thing and say, we think we ought to have fair maps. So in our state, we're going to have a commission. We're going to do all of these things, which I think is terrible. I mean, because look, it would be like the United States in 1952 saying, you know what, nuclear war is a dangerous thing and nuclear bombs are bad. So we don't care what Russia does, but we're getting rid of all of our bombs today.
Well, it's a few states following the rules of morality and the other states cheating. And then you
Right.
can't beat the cheaters
Well,
now because they're cheating and you're choosing not to. So I understand your viewpoint. I don't know the right answer in this situation, but
Yeah.
I just am really worried about where we are now.
And
well,
Russ,
we are where we are, and I guess
hope for
what I
now-
would say. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
My hope for now is that we built all these nuclear weapons. We fought one another at this point, and there's a number of states that are gerrymandered. And you know, and we'll talk about Indiana. Indiana, in terms of its congressional districts, isn't gerrymandered that badly right now. in terms of its state and Senate districts, it's really badly gerrymandered, but our congressional isn't, which is why there's even room to do this right now and talk about it. But there's a lot of states that went back and forth on this. We're at a point where California is going to call a special session. The Texas thing is already happening, and special session was called. New York's looking at how they're going to change their constitution, et cetera, et cetera. And so we're in this point where I feel like the arms race is building without triggers being pulled. And so my hope is that this arms race grows so high that it becomes too nuclear of an option to pull the trigger, and we have a federal resolution of this stopping gerrymandering, or at least tempering it in some different ways, or giving us a release valve by saying you can't redraw district maps in the middle of in between censuses. And so that's where I'd like to see all this go. Because
you think that's possible? You think the Republican-led House, Senate, and President would all sign something like that?
I think if they're consulting companies that are ravishly looking at maps right now and political data and populist data, see that there's a possibility that they will lose this arms race, they'll back off, right?
And do we know, is that happening? Are there maps being drawn that looks unfavorable to the Republicans?
There are consultants being paid millions and millions, hundreds of millions of dollars probably across the whole thing right now, drawing these maps all over Washington in you say dark rooms, but they're probably bright rooms with big glass windows. So doing these maps to try to figure out
that's interesting
who's going to win this race. And if the Republicans are going to win this race at the end of the day, and they think they will, they'll do it. They'll move forward, and it'll be a toppling, California will rewrite, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So,
but I was confused about New York, because I heard New York only has a few weeks to get in the special session to allow them to do gerrymandering. And so I was wondering if the Republicans were just going to wait it out until after that time period to make a play. Like, I feel like we don't have a lot of days.
New York is a more complicated,
right.
So they would have to change their constitution, and it requires two sessions. A vote in two sessions. So they would have to call a special session this year for the first vote. The second vote couldn't happen until next year. Realistically, New York isn't going to be able to change their maps before the 2026 election. I think the issue is, again, using that analogy, sort of mutually assured destruction as a deterrent, that if there's one thing that politicians do care about, it's saving their own necks. So ultimately, look, the leadership, they want as many seats as possible and as much gerrymandering as possible. Ask a Republican from New York or a Republican from California what he thinks about this plan, or she thinks about this plan. They're going to say, we think this is a terrible idea.
I saw an interview with Mike Lawler, who's a Republican.
Yeah, me too.
Won in a Biden plus district. And he's talking about how terrible this is. And then they asked the question, does it have anything to do with the fact that you won in a blue? And he's like, absolutely not. Like,
right.
How do you just say yes? The answer is yes.
I'm just saying, I'm seeing Congress people that I haven't seen in years publicly stand against something, and it happens to be their own seat. I'm like, hang on.
And I think part of the problem politically in the climate that we have, unfortunately, is a lot of that, I guess what we would call common sense, or it's kind of out the window with a lot of these people. And I think there are plenty of Republicans, MAGA Republicans, who would, fall on the sword, so to speak, and say, well, Mr. Trump wants us to do this, we have to do this. And even though they're sitting there going, I'm writing my own ticket out of Congress, I'm going to go along with it. You would hope that would break, and people would look at it and say, look, this, because you're right. Look, in a perfect world, we should have independent commissions in every state. The Democratic leadership in those states was philosophically right to say we're going to do the right thing. But when you're in a fight for democracy and you're playing by the rules and the other folks are cheating, you're not helping yourself. If I'm playing cards at a table and everybody else is cheating, I'm not helping myself or anybody else by keep throwing money on that table.
Yeah.
You can't
Let me
keep
ask you a
playing in
question
a
here about
rigged
that,
game.
which is, I heard Beckwith talking, which is always fun to listen to our lieutenant governor speak. That not only a lot of people like to distance themselves from our lieutenant governor, including our governor. And so he was talking, saying, the Democrats are the first people to throw the bomb here. Massachusetts, they've done this, which is absolutely not true because it was redrawn and that map was signed by a Republican governor. So just he looks foolish when he says things sometimes, right? Massachusetts has done this. New York has done this, which, as we know, they might try to do this more. And he included Illinois, and Illinois seems to be perhaps, and let me know your take on this, an example of the Democrats going a little too far in terms of gerrymandering or in terms of drawing their congressional maps, and that makes it so that this is what I'm hearing, and when talking to people, so that it's not necessarily totally egregious, but there's definitely room to be more fair with their map. And so Indiana has a neighbor right now that they can point to and say, "Hey, look, the Democrats did it. We're gonna do it too." Do you have any knowledge of that? Any understanding of that? Any
Yeah.
thoughts? Yeah.
So what I would say is, again, if you look at the big picture, I don't think there's any question that if other states, either forced by Congress or because they suddenly decided to be fair, if Texas, and Indiana and some of the other states that are gerrymandered on the Republican side said, here's our map, let's all put our maps on the table, these are all going to be our fair maps, I will tell you that Illinois would have a fair map. But what Illinois sees is, listen, uh, if Texas is going to, you can see some of those congressional districts. Remember in Ohio, the Jordan's district was shaped like an animal. It would just went all over the place, and so I think I don't think there's any question, number one, that it is a choice to fight fire with fire. I am for that. Look, if you're not going to play fair, I'm going to do whatever I can to compete within the law. That's the first thing. The second thing is, look, the Illinois districts, whether you like them or not, are done during the standard redistricting every 10 years. Nobody in Illinois came and said, fired the first shot here. Governor
Yeah.
Newsom did not come and say, I'm going to hold this special session. If Texas doesn't do this, if Donald Trump doesn't tell Texas to do this, none of these Democratic states are going to be taking the actions that they're taking.
Well,
And
let's get into that.
Illinois, as an
Let's get into that,
example.
Ross. I really want to understand this more. This is a nuance of what's happening today about gerrymandering that's very new. This is a new technique to try to gerrymander, which is to gerrymander in between censuses. And I want to talk about why that's so important. I also want to mention something about the Indiana maps is, some when you look at it say Indiana's not as gerrymandered geographically, but we have about 40% Democrats, a little over 40% Democrats voting in our statewide elections for our governor's race, attorney general, etc. Yet we only have 2 of 7 congressional districts, right? So if you were to think about how you would
2
make
of
it
9, isn't it 2 of
2 of
9?
9, 2
Yeah.
verse 7, excuse me. So 2 of 9. So if you were to think about what it would look like if it were fair, it would be more 4 or 5, right? You could use that as a way to think about approximately what it might look like to be fair on a political Democrat versus Republican basis. But when we talk about gerrymandering, often when these there's analyses is this state gerrymandered or not? What they're looking at is the racial makeup of people.
Right.
And how
Because
it's done.
I think they're really good, like with your district, District 9, Tim,
Yeah.
with population. They're really good at like taking out big cities, grouping big cities in places that are already going to go Dem, the two ones that go Democrat. And that's how they've been able to do to my state house race so well, is
Right.
just populations making mine so rural.
As well as take him out. I want
Yeah.
Ross to be able to vote for me, but he can't. He's in Columbus. There's a little keyhole to make sure his address
Yeah,
is.
it would make sense for Columbus to be in District 9.
Sure would.
It's an hour away from me, but some places District 9 is 2 hours away from me. It's like, hang on.
Yeah.
So what
Okay.
generally happens in gerrymandering is the majority. Sorry, I got a fly
The
coming
fly
after
is
me over
really
here.
giving some good
We
humor
have a
with this
Pence
dark subject.
situation going. We call that the
Yes,
Pence.
absolutely. So what normally happens is the majority wants to take as many of the minority parties' voters and put them in one district. So you will generally have in a Democratic state, you will have majority Democratic districts, but then you will have one or two districts that are absolutely red. And the same is true in Indiana. Obviously, we have one of those, which is the seventh, which is, we want to keep as many of those Democrats there as possible. And that's normal with gerrymandering. I think what they would try to do in Indiana is, um, sort of a reverse gerrymander, if you will, at least for the short term, is to take those stronghold Democrats and split them up into as many districts as possible. So in the short term, you get a gain. And the problem with that is in the long term, you're creating more competitive districts. And I think one of the interesting things about looking at Indiana for a potential gerrymander, it can't be gerrymandered toward the Republicans much more than it already is without affecting some of the other congressional races. If you take Democrats out of one, they've naturally, Mervan's district, they've got to go somewhere. So you're going to be putting more Democrats in somebody else's district. If you were to, which I think would be insane, but if you were to try to divide Andre Carson's district and split it into four pieces, ask any of those surrounding Congress people if they would like Republicans, if they'd like a chunk of Indianapolis in their district. No, they do not. So I don't think it happens in Indiana for that reason. I just don't think it's there. But what it does show is what a lapdog our governor is for the president.
Yeah.
That our legislature they see as patsies that will just roll over. So they come to Indiana not because it is a wonderful opportunity, but it's low hanging fruit. We could
Right.
get Indiana to do
They
whatever
say
we
jump.
want.
Trump says jump. Braun says how high you got it.
And when
Yeah.
they don't do it, they're going to say how they are defending democracy and how good they are, rather than if we did this, we would bite ourselves in our own, ass.
And I'm really proud of
This is
Indiana
not-
right now. We are fighting back. Mad Voters put together a really good protest and program at the State House when JD Vance came last Thursday. They protested at the governor's house. There are calls constantly being made to our state and federal elected officials opposing this. It is very clear that the voters do not want this. But like you're saying, when Trump says jump and Braun says how high, that's the problem. It's that they just take orders and they do it, even if it hurts themselves. They don't care. They just do it. It's this bullying problem. Now, there's a problem with Democrats. Okay, after Trump won this second time, after Trump won, what's that say?
This is a sign
reform, redistricting now. That's great. It's a sign in someone's yard. That's awesome.
Yeah, someone sent this to me just now. So yeah.
Yeah,
It's
so
incredible.
Democrats,
People are getting out there.
after Trump one, people were very upset for good reasons with the Democratic Party. And I have to say, for these first few months, I have not been super impressed with the Democrats standing up and fighting, not just, blaming and going after Trump, but actually like fighting the systematic problems that we've created now. This is the first time since Trump has been elected in the second term that I'm seeing Democrats fight in good ways. And I'm actually starting to feel a little bit more confident with this other side that we have. How do you feel about that, Ross?
Well, I'm going to be a little more cynical, I think, than you would like. But I don't know that when we talk about gerrymandering, Indiana's state legislature is perhaps the most gerrymandered in the United States. Uh, we and in large part because of the gerrymandering, when you're not in a competitive district, your your eagerness to vote is sometimes understandable. Why should I vote if I'm a Democrat in an 80-20 Republican
The
district?
hopelessness. Yeah, yeah.
Okay, so we have the lowest voter turnout in the country almost every election, or close to it, in the bottom two or three every time because of that. And what you end up with are um, a lot of people in the legislature who really don't care um, how much of a protest there is, unless it is, they're much more concerned with being put in a district with another Republican than they are about upsetting the voters, and they don't really answer to the voters. So I think protest is good, just to educate people, just to let people know. But as far as changing hearts and minds in the state legislature, I don't think so. That the only thing that's going to change their minds is self-preservation. And when they see that, I thought it was pretty humorous that one of the first people that came out against it was Jim Lucas, who is a moron, and a racist. And if people know the history of Jim Lucas and all the, he is not the most popular person in the state legislature among the Republican caucus, not because he's MAGA, but because he personally, is an embarrassment. So eh, they actually tried to gerrymander
Before
him.
you talk more, let me just say a couple things about Jim Lucas, right? So our listeners know who this man is. Represents the area around Seymour mostly for us, and he was in a drunk driving accident. He also showed his gun that he was carrying to children that were visiting the state house when they asked about gun control or what they would do about mass shootings. And so his response was to show his gun and scare some kids. This is his first instincts, right, about it. You can be all you want about be pro, gun if you want, but
Maybe don't show it to kids when they
don't
come
scare
and visit on
children.
field trip and they're traumatized by the school shooting drills they have to do frequently. Yeah.
Absolutely. He's just completely out of touch. And I saw him debate Trish Whitcomb, and he was terrible. And then at the end, he said this fake apology about his drunk driving and that he's learned from it. And I just saw a whole bunch of people in there clap for him about how he's learned from his drunk driving. And I'm like, what do you what we're letting this person be the representative? I mean, just pick another MAGA person from your district to represent you if that's what you want to do. But like the bending of our morals to go with who's in
He's
power.
on their side and they've
But
decided
but
that side's
the
amazing. And
interesting
so,
thing
yeah.
about him, if you go back and look at the last map, the Republicans who drew that map really tried to draw him out. They put him in the same district with a 12-term incumbent from Salem. I think hoping that he would lose that primary. Unfortunately for that gentleman, he passed away before the next election.
Wow.
But I mean, again, I think it goes to show you what I'm saying is what they care about is saving their own necks. The reason that a guy like Jim Lucas is adamantly against more gerrymandering is because he knows that that they would love to gerrymander him out. And as you say, Dr. Peck, um, bring us another less personally embarrassing MAGA guy, but let's get rid of this guy. So again, I think what we're looking at is these folks. Their number one issue is going to be saving their own necks, and that's the one thing that might save us in Indiana. It's very hard to gerrymander beyond, but
I
there
think,
also are going to be legal challenges to it as well.
and let me say the other thing that'll save if this goes through. Here's your hope. Here's your hope as a voter who might be a progressive voter, moderate voter, a right of center voter who's tired of what is going on in the representing them, is that as we talked about, Indiana is a over 40-60 state, call it, in terms of our voting population for Democrats versus Republicans. Now, we know that a lot of this gerrymandering makes it so that people lose 80-20 all the time. And we know in Indy, you win 90-10 as for Democrats, right? That's showing it. And there are other cities where you have blue kind of concentration happening because of gerrymandering. Now, if the gerrymandering happens and we start to see that voter suppression is a real thing, and it's not been a frog and water type situation, which it has been in Indiana for a long time, where we're doing this little thing and this little thing and this little thing to make it so that, oh, you just think this is a red state, rather than thinking it's a 40-60 state. You will be able to get out of what happened 4 years ago in the last midterm election, which was we were 50th in turnout in the country. If we became, with, again, progressive voters, moderate voters, right of center voters came out and they voted, and we became 45th in the country, 40th in the country, because they came out, Democrats win most of these districts that get gerrymandered. Because as Ross says, they're going to be putting Democrats into these red places to dilute them a bit in order to think that they can win another seat. But that is an opportunity to get a turnout like we had in 2008 kind of thing, to get people mad about, hey, you're trying to suppress me. I'm going to come out and vote, and we're going to show you what suppression looks like.
Tim, so that's the absolute most important thing of this whole thing. We can fix some of this in Indiana in this next primary, November 2026. We can do this. And we are, if you look at it, because it is dark right now, like I'm struggling. If you look at all the organizing we've done in Indiana so far, right? Like we've been doing a pretty good job. And it's not necessarily the Indiana Democratic Party. It's all these other groups that have popped up, Indivisible, Absolutely. Mad Voters, the teachers groups. It's just like there's just tons of them. Hoosier Action. And we're all working together and we're all letting more people know what's going on. But the question is, will they vote? Will they turn up to vote, or will they stay hopeless and think it doesn't matter? And that's kind of on the leaders. That's kind of on us to do our part to motivate and say it does matter. Even if we don't win this time, we keep going. We owe it to our children to make this state better, Yeah.
I think as a county chairman, one of the messages that I have had for people who have joined protest movements, which I think is wonderful. Listen, by itself, if a person says, I made a nice sign and I'm going to go down to the courthouse square and I'm going to hold my sign, so I've done my part. Well, you haven't really.
You got out some of your rage, which is important, and that's a part of it.
It is an important part of it, and you're organizing and you're being visible, but you've got to become involved in electoral politics. If you don't elect new people, you're going to be protesting the same people for the rest of your life. So
and I think you're right, Ross. And I think that is so important. And if you're a Republican official, you're less fearful of that, because you're saying, okay, that's getting people to protest, but they're not going to vote. They're not going to do the organization they need to get out the vote, right? If you're a cynical Republican GOP congressperson or official,
Hey,
what I would say,
cynical GOP person, we got a lot of those protesters at our last DEM meeting in Harrison County, FYI.
right, and exactly, and so you get some of them. So what I would say is, last night we had a training for at Timbuktu for Congress for knocking doors, and it's early, right? It's 15 months before the election. We've already done almost 3,500 doors. We have a goal for 100,000. But what I want to say about that is, if you were a GOP official and you went in that room last night and you saw people concentrating, learning how to use the software, getting the maps that they need so that they can go out and knock doors and talk to people and mobilize, you'd say, oh wow, oh wow, this has actually gone another step forward. People are organizing to actually get out the vote as well.
Yeah, there's
And
only
that's what I was
so
trying to point out.
long, there's only so much Indiana elected officials can hurt their own base until it turns on them. And
Yep.
I think we've reached that tipping point, and if we can stay organized and keep working together and keep training everybody how to get out the vote, how to get people to run for local office, if we keep doing it, we should be able to make a difference even with the voter suppression
Yeah.
in this next election.
And we need both. We need people to be standing up there, making sure they're seen, making sure their issues are seen, yes. But we also need people one-on-one, the hard work, getting out there, knocking on doors, writing postcards kind of thing, going on your phone book and like calling your 10 best friends in Indiana 9 and having a deep conversation with them about the fact that we're a 40, 60 state and 50th in the nation in turnout. And if we just became 45th or 40th in the nation in turnout, we win. Just come out. Just come out in your car. Offer to drive everybody. It's about voting, and that's the only way we're going to win. And this year feels like a different energy. And if we can have all those groups that you talked about, Sarah, kind of peak at the same time, and get people out together in one voice and one way, and get people out on that election day, I think we can shock the rest of the state and the rest of the country here. So Ross, just let's get into that. This is a in between censuses. So there's, as I understand it, there's no law saying that you can't redistrict in between censuses at a federal level.
Which is crazy to me. I did not realize that. I thought there was.
But some states have in their constitution that you can't do that, such as New York, which we talked about. So they'd have to change their constitution to be able to do that. But Indiana doesn't have anything in their constitution saying you can't redistrict in the middle of the in between censuses, as far as I understand. How do you?
Well, so I wouldn't. It is specifically silent on the issue, and so that doesn't automatically mean that anything goes. And so the first thing you look at, our Constitution does talk about in Article 4, the legislative article, Section 5, it specifically says that our state maps have to be drawn by the General Assembly that is elected during the census year. So that means either that year or the next year, because these are 2-year terms, that you could not do a mid-year gerrymander of state legislative districts. And that is absolutely clear, because obviously after 2 years, it's no longer the General Assembly that was elected during the census year.
I did not know that. Okay, that's good.
Couldn't do it. But once you open that can of worms, lots of things can happen. And listen, we've seen a lot of things that appear on their face, like birthright citizenship, let's say, that seem very clear in black and white in the Constitution, that many Republicans are saying, yeah, we don't think so. So I wouldn't even look at that black and white language and say, well, we have nothing to worry about there. We've seen lots of just broad challenges to what appears to be straight language. But there is not a corollary that says, and this is also how we're going to do the congressional districts. You could certainly make an argument that it is implied in the document that this is the process, and it could certainly be litigated. When there's nothing, when it doesn't say you can and it doesn't say you can't, there's always an argument on both sides about legislative intent, about those things. So you could potentially have a state constitutional argument there. You also can have it still has to fit what is left of the Voting Rights Act. Obviously, as was mentioned before, if there is a clear racial component to a gerrymander, which if you try to divide Indianapolis or you try to divide, Lake County, which have large minority communities, it's very hard to do without at least appearing to have a racial component. And as I mentioned earlier, Republicans have done a good job in several states of trying to diffuse that by saying it's only a coincidence that these Democrats are all African Americans, and to try to get by that. But there is a state law that says when the congressional districts are drawn, but it is not in the Constitution. So the Republicans would have to overturn our law in order to do this, which they could do with their supermajority. But it's not simply a matter of walking in and voting. You would have to first repeal a law that they all voted for, that they all supported, and say, well, never mind, and do those things. So there definitely are potential legal challenges, both through the Voting Rights Act, both through the state constitution, and state statutory law, that you could tie this up for a while if you wanted to. But
And
you're
if this
right,
goes
Doctor, there is no constitutional prohibition in Indiana for midterm gerrymandering at the congressional level.
at the congressional level, but there is at the state and state senate level. So what I also want to ask is, okay, so the Republicans go through with this. Maybe they don't even change the law because they say we don't need to. It's not a congressional. There's nothing on here saying about congressional districts, and if we can redistrict them or not. So we're going to decide that we're not even going to try to change the law, or they change the law and they move forward. Either way, if the Democrats then sue, or some racial community that got split says you just split us, we're suing, or the ACLU sues, or someone sues, who are they? Where does that? Who's litigating that? Where does that go? Is that a federal thing? Is that what courts are hearing that? Does that go straight to the Supreme Court of the United States? Like, how does that work?
Well, if I were doing it, I would bring it in state court. You can raise federal questions in state court. It would be up to the other side to take it to federal court. The problem is, if you have state court questions in addition to federal questions, generally in a sane world, the federal judiciary is not going to take a case that they know is going to involve state law questions that they don't answer. The problem with bringing a federal suit at this point, as I mentioned before, the U.S. Supreme Court has basically said, hands off. We're not interested in these gerrymandering cases at all. And I think strategically, you probably would want to bring that at least initially in state court to raise both federal and state questions about it. And just real quick, there is a state statute in place that dictates that the congressional districts are drawn during the census year. It is not in the Constitution, but they would have to repeal a statute, which is easy to do.
What's the difference between a statute and a law then?
Well, so the statute is the law. the Constitution and the statutory law are the two different things. So the Constitution sort of sets out bedrock framework. These are things that you have to do. So,
Mhm.
in other words, if we'll use the state legislature as an example, the our state constitution clearly says that our legislature districts are drawn by the legislature that's elected during the census year. That if we tried to pass a law, a statute that said we're going to draw the maps every 2 years for the state legislature, you could pass that law, that statute, but it would be unconstitutional because the Constitution says, nope, this is when we do it. And in order to make that law, you would have to overturn the Constitution. So when we talk about law, we're generally talking about statutes, but all of the statutes have to the Constitution. And of course, the U.S. Constitution overrides even the state constitution as it relates to federal questions.
Got it.
So Tim, you're one of the smartest people I know. And you've been working on this since you heard about it in Indiana and figuring out as much as you can. And you still needed Ross, the lawyer, to get on. And Ross, you did a really good job of explaining that this is part of the problem, you all. This is so confusing. There are so many laws. There's state laws. There's national. There's Supreme Court. There's all this stuff. And this is part of the reason they've been able to do these things to us across the country, because it is so freaking confusing. So, I wish we didn't need a law degree to know what was happening to our rights, like, and I wish it was a little bit simpler, but I'm very thankful that you came on, Ross. You explained a lot to me that I didn't know. So thank you.
Yeah, Ross, thank you. We need to wrap up so that we can keep this tight and under an hour, because this also goes on to the radio now, and so we're in the hour format now.
I learned how to put stuff on the radio, you guys.
I appreciate being here. I guess the last thing I would tell you guys and is the law is not going to save us here. It's not. The people who write the laws, the people who interpret the laws, are not in the proper frame of mind. The law is not going to save us. Voters
It's
are going to
voting.
save
It's
us.
voters turning up to vote for our own rights, telling
And
everybody,
we can
getting everybody to vote.
we can use the law to throw a wrench in the spokes, but ultimately, the law is not going to save us.
If you want to protect your kids' right to vote, it is your job right now, as it is my job, to get as many people motivated to vote in your area as possible. It is as simple as that. Are all your friends and family and neighbors, do they all know what's going on? And are they registered to vote? And do they know when to vote? It takes that. There's no magic solution going to come in and fix this.
In a state of 7.5 million people, over 2 million people did not vote last year.
That's so
and
many.
So, and that doesn't include children and
that's just registered voters or people that could vote.
People who would be eligible to vote. So
wow.
This is just vote. This is just vote, and you will be able to win this election if you care about the issues, including making sure that you're represented properly here in Indiana. So thank you, Ross, so much.
Thank you, Ross,
for everything that you do, for explaining this to us. And we're going to try to keep Indiana in place where we can make it free of fear and hate. And so thank you for helping us do that.
Please thanks, Ross. Please like and subscribe to Project Next. Please text this or send it to a friend who would benefit from knowing this information. And we have a Substack. It's Project Next Indiana. It's free. You just put your email in it when you go to the website, and then you will get emails of our shows, and you can just pick out which shows you'd like to watch. We also have a YouTube channel we'd love you to subscribe to. Just go to Project Next and find it and subscribe. Like some of our content, maybe comment. If you can leave us a review, we're also podcasts, Apple, and Spotify. So we're a lot of places. And if you can just, whichever way you prefer to watch it and send it to some people, that would really help us out. Thank you, everybody. Thanks, Zeke. You've been really a big fan this week. I really appreciate you. And thanks, you guys. Have a fantastic rest of your week and hang in there. We're fighting. We're all fighting, and we're going to do this. Bye, everybody.
Thanks.